I'm Tim Brander. Welcome to Capitol Views. We're here with Chris Rose, the director of the Renewable Energy Alaska project. Chris, you're a kind of a well-known face around the Capitol. You've been sort of the face and voice of renewable energy here for some years, promoting renewable energy in Alaska and less use of diesel fuel. Tell us about REAP. What is it? How does it work? Who are the members of it? And Sure. What are some of your goals?
Thanks, Tim. We are a statewide coalition of over 80 organizations. We're a nonprofit. It's composed of electric utilities that are both large and small, rail belt, as well as rural utilities, native corporations, businesses, developers, conservation groups, and other NGOs, all with the goal of increasing the production of renewable energy in the state and promoting energy efficiency. So we've been working since 2004 now on a variety of policies and programs to promote both renewable energy and energy efficiency, which we combine into clean energy.
You know, what are your more well-known projects and really in some ways accomplishments, because you folks were very instrumental in helping it, is the Rural Energy
Grant Fund.
Yeah, and how does that's been in existence for some years now, and how does it work? How many are there now?
So the Renewable Energy Grant Fund was passed by the legislature in 2008, and what it did was create a fund of money to provide grants for renewable energy projects around the state. And so far, there have been 69 projects that have actually been constructed through that grant money. The legislature, over the course of almost a decade, appropriated about $259 million for those projects, and that leveraged another $200 million or so in federal and private money. That's resulted in those constructed projects as well as a bunch of feasibility studies and designs. The 69 projects that are already built are estimated to be saving 30 million gallons of diesel fuel a year right now. So that's a great amount of diesel. Even at $2 a gallon, that's $60 million a year that program has been saving so far. And of course, we see those projects lasting for 25, 30 years, and hopefully over time getting optimized and continuing to save even more diesel.
Well, a couple of comments. The $2 a gallon is really a kind of a moving target, because really in many rural communities, the price is much higher because of the transportation cost. $4, $6, even some cases $8 a gallon. So it 30 million gallons a year can be quite significant.
Yes, that's right. And I don't think we've been able to compute exactly in dollar value what that is, but it's significant.
And also, I would guess that since a lot of the projects are still in design and engineering, that there's going to be more projects coming online.
There'll definitely be more projects. Of course, there may not always be grant money. And so one of the things that we're looking for is the opportunity to get private investors in to develop these projects, which includes making sure that all these are investable opportunities. Part of that includes the fact that we need to make sure these projects perform, so that points toward O&M, and making sure that these projects are maintained over time and continue to perform. So all of these pieces are kind of fit together. Over time, I think we will continue to have these projects because diesel really has nowhere to go but up in the long term. And meanwhile, these renewable energy technologies just keep getting better and cheaper.
And what would some of the mix of the projects be? Wind, I know in the beginning a fair number of wind projects were built, but we have hydro, small hydro, and biomass also?
That's right. Of the 69 projects, probably close to half are wind projects. So we would call those wind diesel hybrid projects, because the diesel is still there in the background. And Alaska has now become recognized as a world leader in wind diesel technology, because we've gotten very good at marrying the diesel with the wind through these control systems. That allows the diesels to be off as long as possible. As you said, there's also been some small hydro projects and some biomass projects. There's also even been a couple of projects that relate to hydrokinetics, the ability to potentially get energy out of rivers that are all over the state.
Where are we with these? This would involve a turbine lowered into the river?
That's right. Hydrokinetics would relate to a turbine that's in a river. It could even be tidal technology. It's a very similar technology. It would go below the surface of the river, and the turbines are designed to spin both ways. So if you did have them in a tidal environment, they could go either direction depending whether the tide was going in or out. But that technology is still emerging. It's probably where wind was 30 or 40 years ago. And as soon as those designs essentially are finalized and perfected, then we will start seeing economy of scale production. And then the price of those kinds of technologies will go down for people around the world. we're actually pioneering a lot of this because we're the only state in the United States that has remote places like our 200 rural villages. And so we are actually developing projects and technologies that the rest of the developing world is looking at very closely.
So these are potential things that could be exported. Type expertise developed here in companies and contractors?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's the expertise and the ability to basically put this recipe together, all these different components together in one hybrid system.
Chris, you know, when we speak of biomass, I think of the old Yukon stoves, just a log put into a barrel. Like when I came up here in the 1960s and early 1970s, I saw those. So have things changed? Do we have, I mean, what does biomass mean these days?
Well, biomass can mean a lot of different things. It can mean wood, it can mean fish oil, it could even mean things like the methane that's being captured at the Anchorage landfill. That is producing the equivalent of 4 or 5 megawatts worth of power every year. EPA was telling the Anchorage landfill they had to start flaring that gas because it was going into the atmosphere, and so instead of flaring it, they began to capture it. But most of the biomass projects are related to wood, and most of them are still really relatively basic technology. They have these things called garn boilers, which are like a giant stove, if you will, that gets fed during the day with cordwood, and that can heat a jacket full of water and then use that heat transfer to heat buildings. There's also a lot of places in the state that are using some of the waste heat from biomass for greenhouses and developing food projects for the local schools.
That's pretty neat. And I know also that some of the waste heat is used to provide space heating for community buildings.
That's
which
right.
is important, I think.
That's right, and even with excess electricity from wind, for instance, oftentimes that excess electricity is converted to heat and stored that way by heating a big mass of water.
Yeah.
There are a few communities now that are working at using excess wind to heat individual homes with little electric stoves in the home, and that technology is progressing. That would be great for rural Alaska because heating is often more expensive, most times more expensive than electricity.
Yeah, a lot of the projects that I've heard about are related to the utilities and the production of electricity, but space heating is really something that people often forget about is also a need.
Absolutely, heating is the biggest issue, really, and depending where you're at, transportation can be a big issue. If you live in the Mat-Su Valley and you're commuting to Anchorage every day, a big part of your energy budget is going into gasoline. So we look at the gamut of transportation and heat, but a lot of this is focused on electricity.
You know, one of the most imaginative biomass projects I've heard about is on the Tanana, the Yukon River, where there are logs floating down the Yukon, and the community has gone out in skiffs and snagged the logs, and they bring them ashore and they chop them up and they run through these big garn boilers to heat community buildings. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, really resourceful. You know, if you're paying, like you were saying before, $8 a gallon for heating oil, you start to look at what your options might be.
Well, Chris, thank you. This has been interesting. Thanks for joining us today. And this is Tim Bradner. Thanks for joining us at Capitol Views.
Thanks, Tim.